Morbid facts. This is the harrowing skull of a man with Proteus syndrome, a rare and awful condition characterized by the overgrowth of skin, organs, tissues, and bones. Nikola Tesla originally expected to live to the age of 150, but later lowered this estimate to 135 years when he was forced to give up alcohol due to prohibition. He thought that consuming alcohol was good for the body and was a heavy drinker as a result. Tesla ended up dying at the age of 86. When revolutionary hero Guy Fawkes was convicted of high treason in 1605, his punishment was to be hanged, drawn, and quartered, meaning he would be hanged almost to the point of death, have his intestines and sex organs removed while still alive, decapitated, and have his limbs torn off. After the sentencing, Fawkes said "fuck that" and leapt from the gallows so that the rope broke his neck and killed him immediately. The drawing and quartering was still performed on his corpse, and his body parts were paraded around London. A British Marine had a leg tattoo of Liverpool's motto, "You'll never walk alone." But after a major injury in Afghanistan, his leg was amputated, and the surgeon had to cut the tattoo so it now read, "You'll never walk." Author Lois Duncan wrote many popular crime and suspense novels throughout the 70s and 80s, but she essentially stopped writing completely when her own daughter became the victim of an unsolved murder case in 1989. In 1950, a church in Nebraska exploded 5 minutes after choir practice was supposed to start. But miraculously, all 15 members of the choir were late that day for different reasons, and not a single person was hurt. In 1977, the University of Evansville men's basketball team was involved in a tragic plane crash. The crash killed everyone on the team except for one young man who didn't make the trip due to an injury. But just 2 weeks after the crash, the only surviving player, 18-year-old statistician David Furr, was killed by a drunk driver.
What would you do to him, Beth? What would you stab him with?
Beth Thomas entered the spotlight at the age of 6 when she was interviewed for the 1992 documentary Child of Rage. After being sexually abused by her father starting at the age of 1, the girl had developed severe psychological issues. During the interview, she admitted to sexually abusing her little brother Jonathan, repeatedly smashing his head against a concrete floor, torturing the family dog, and killing a nest of baby birds. She also admitted to constantly touching herself until her private parts started to bleed. Here's some disturbing footage from the film.
Nighttime, what do your parents do to your door?
Lock it shut,
Why do they lock it shut?
because they don't want me to hurt John.
And what would you do to him, Beth?
Stab him,
What would you stab him with?
a knife.
And they're kind of afraid of you hurting John? Are they afraid that you might hurt them?
Yep.
Would you, Beth? When would you do it?
Right now,
Why would you do nighttime?
because I don't like them seeing me.
Despite her troubled childhood, Beth later built a successful career as a nurse. In 1954, Ann Hodges was hit with a softball-sized meteorite while taking a nap in her Alabama home. She remains the only known human to ever be hit by a meteorite. Jeremy Moody was a guest at a party for lifeguards who were celebrating going an entire season without anyone drowning. But at the end of the party, with over 100 lifeguards present, Jeremy's body was found at the bottom of the pool. In 1996, a man's body floated up to a boat in the seas of the UK. There was no identification on the body except for a 25-year-old Rolex Oyster on his wrist. Thanks to Rolex maintaining such meticulous service records, they were able to identify the man and ultimately his killer. In the 1980s, a family owned a ceramic factory in California called Oscar Ceramics. But in 1987, the factory was shut down when it was revealed to be an illegal crematorium. This only happened when a passerby who happened to be a Holocaust survivor recognized the smell of burning bodies from his time at Auschwitz. In 1999, skydiver Joan Murray's parachute malfunctioned, causing her to fall from 14,000 feet directly onto a mound of fire ants. But doctors think the shock of adrenaline from 200 fire ant stings kept her heart beating and saved her life. 112 people died during the construction of the Hoover Dam. The first to die was surveyor J.G. Tierney on December 20th, 1922. On the same exact day, 14 years later, the last person died during construction. It was J.G.'s son, Patrick Tierney. In 1979, Elvita Adams tried to cease her own existence by plummeting from the Empire State Building. She leapt from the 86th floor but was blown back onto the 85th floor by a sudden strong gust of wind. In 1991, a woman from Thailand accidentally slipped in the mud, grabbed a live wire, and was electrocuted to death. Later that same day, when her sister was showing the neighbors how the accident happened, she slipped, grabbed the same live wire, and was electrocuted to death. After Martin Luther King Jr. was killed in 1968, his funeral was held at Morehouse College in Atlanta. A small group of current students were chosen to be ushers for his funeral, and one of them was Samuel L. Jackson. In 1976, Troy Leon Gregg was sentenced to death for murdering 3 men in Georgia. On the night before his execution, he managed to escape, only to be killed in a bar fight that same night. Speaking of execution, in 1915, Mexican man Wenceslao Moguel was sentenced to death and shot 9 times by a firing squad. But he miraculously managed to survive every shot, including the coup de grace, a final shot to the head at point-blank range to ensure death. He went on to live for another 70 years, finally dying in 1976. In 2004, grandmother Dorothy Fletcher suddenly suffered a heart attack while on her flight to Florida. When the stewardess asked if there was a doctor on board, 15 people stood up. It was a group of doctors on their way to a cardiology conference. In 2009, 25-year-old chemistry student Vladimir Likonos died after his chewing gum exploded in his mouth. He had a strange habit of dipping his gum in citric acid for extra sourness, but accidentally used an explosive powder from his chemistry experiments that was 4 times stronger than TNT. Likely caused by the reaction with his saliva or chewing pressure, the explosion blew off his jaw and led to his eventual death. According to a 2011 study, children exposed to family violence show the same patterns of brain activity as soldiers exposed to combat. Throughout Chinese history, it was common for parents to castrate their boys as a way to escape poverty. Both the shaft and the nuts would be sliced off with a knife at the same time. These castrated members of society, known as eunuchs, were considered thoroughly pure and therefore qualified as high-ranking civil servants. This disturbing system lasted until 1924, with the last imperial eunuch dying in 1996. Within seconds of the band Great White taking the stage at the Station nightclub in 2003, faulty pyrotechnics ignited the flammable acoustic foam that surrounded the stage. Far exceeding the building's capacity, all 462 people quickly flooded the exits as the entire building was rapidly engulfed in flames. But many struggled to find the exits due to the heavy smoke, leading to a pileup at the front entrance that prevented anyone else from escaping. Multiple survivors also claimed that 2 bouncers blocked the stage door as fans attempted to escape the building, telling them that the door was only to be used by the band. In the end, 100 people lost their lives, including Great White's guitarist Ty Longley. One man named Mike Vargas managed to survive for 90 minutes inside the building. He was trampled by a mob trying to escape and only survived because he was insulated by all the bodies burning around him. He walked out with only minor burns but still suffers from severe PTSD. After reportedly losing custody of her kids for child cruelty, 36-year-old Florida woman Tara Sykes managed to communicate with her 10-year-old daughter through Roblox and used the online game's chat feature to encourage the girl to murder her 2-month-old sibling. The woman allegedly instructed her daughter to drop the baby on a hard tile floor, scald him in boiling hot water, and drown him in the bathtub. The infant suffered serious injuries after being dropped on the floor, but thankfully survived. Sykes also instructed the girl to kill her temporary guardians by slitting their throats as they slept and dousing their sheets with aerosol spray before setting them on fire. The 10-year-old girl doused the sheets but was unable to carry out the rest of the instructions. The disturbing messages were eventually uncovered during an investigation, and Sykes is facing a multitude of charges. The child allegedly told authorities that she's terrified of her mother and thought the woman would kill her if she didn't follow the instructions. This is the face of a mass shooter, David Katz, showing no emotion as he plays in a Madden tournament against other pro gamers. Katz was an elite player known as Bread, who always had the same lifeless expression on his face whether he won or lost a game. During a professional Madden 19 tournament in Jacksonville, Florida, Katz refused to shake the hand of his opponent after losing to him and stormed out of the tournament. Shortly afterwards, he returned with 2 handguns and fired 12 rounds into the players and crowd. 2 people were killed and 10 others were wounded before Katz turned the gun on himself. This eerie photo shows the red dot from David's sight on the chest of 22-year-old victim Elijah Clayton, who made a last-minute decision to enter the tournament. It was later revealed that Katz had suffered from numerous mental illnesses and had been institutionalized several times throughout his life. EA Sports offered its most heartfelt sympathies and donated $1 million to the victims' families in lieu of the senseless tragedy. In March of 1998, 23-year-old Virginia woman Amy Lynn Bradley was on a Royal Caribbean cruise ship to Curacao when she suddenly vanished from the balcony of her cabin around 6 a.m. The Coast Guard conducted a 4-day search in surrounding waters but found no trace of her, so authorities concluded that she simply fell overboard and drowned. But in the years since, there have been several reported sightings of Amy that suggest she may have been kidnapped and forced into human trafficking. 1 year after she went missing, a U.S. Navy sailor claimed he met a woman named Amy in a Barbados brothel who matched her description and begged him for help, but he didn't report it at the time. In 2005, an anonymous email was sent to Amy's family, containing 2 photographs of a sex worker who closely resembled Amy, but nothing ever came of it. Despite various other sightings of the woman with men holding on to her, Amy Lynn Bradley was declared legally dead in March of 2010, 12 years after her disappearance. In 1981, 3 young men found the murdered body of a woman laying in a roadside ditch in Ohio. She was known as the Buckskin Girl because of the poncho she'd been wearing, but police struggled to identify her for decades. That was until 37 years later in 2018 when DNA analysis identified her as hitchhiker Marsha King. Her mother had still been living in the same house with the same phone number, never giving up hope that her daughter may return home one day. Marsha's murder remains unsolved, but the case is still open. In a form of doping known as boosting, wheelchair athletes with spinal injuries will sometimes intentionally injure themselves below the waist to cause their bodies to respond by raising blood pressure, thus enhancing their performance. Techniques include clamping down on a catheter to overfill the bladder, breaking toe bones, and administering electric shocks to the legs, feet, and testicles. Boosting has been completely banned by the International Paralympic Committee since 1994. Wonder Woman was created by a polyamorous male kinkster who was married to 2 bisexual women. The character was originally made to represent an overtly kinky sex symbol for women, and was nearly cancelled from the start because of how explicitly she was being depicted. The throuple was also heavily into bondage, which supposedly inspired Wonder Woman's rope. Edgar Allan Poe married his first cousin Virginia when she was 13 years old and he was 27. The pair first met when Virginia was only 7 while Edgar was 21. Former Vice President Nelson Rockefeller suffered a heart attack and died while having intercourse with his 25-year-old assistant. He was 70 years old at the time. Most famous for his 6 different marriages, King Henry VIII hired 4 men to regularly check his feces, monitor his bowel movements, and wipe his bottom. They were known as the grooms of the King's Stool, and all of them were eventually knighted. In 1983, 22-year-old Michael Anderson Godwin was sentenced to death by electric chair after brutally murdering a young woman in South Carolina. But the electrocution ruling was later overturned, and Godwin was only handed a life sentence. A few years later, he was sitting on his toilet while trying to connect his headphones to his TV when he bit down on the wire and was electrocuted to death. In 2019, a man was using Google Earth to check out his old neighborhood when he happened to stumble upon something spooky. A car containing the remains of a man who'd been missing for 22 years. 40-year-old William Molt was reported missing in 1997 when he failed to return home after leaving a nightclub. Here's a 1989 photo of South African spearfisherman Geerjo van Niekerk showing off his recent bite mark from a great white. He told reporters it was a 1 in a million freak accident. While diving near Cape Town just 2 months afterwards, Geerjo went missing until his shark-bitten leg washed ashore a few days later. NBA legend Dennis Rodman was once on a cruise with his girlfriend when they wanted to try something different in bed. She suggested for Dennis to run and jump inside of her while she was laying down unclothed. This resulted in Dennis shattering his member and pouring blood all over the bed. It was the first of 3 times that he would break his pecker, since once you break it the first time, it becomes way easier to break again. Gouverneur Morris was an important founding father of the United States who wrote the introduction to the Constitution. But he died at the age of 64 after attempting to clear a urinary tract blockage using a whalebone as a catheter. While the practice of marrying your cousin is typically seen as something only done by British royalty or Alabama rednecks, up until the 1900s, virtually no one married complete strangers like we do today. In fact, 80% of all marriages throughout history have been between second cousins or closer. In 2012, Donna Summer died from lung cancer at the age of 63, even though she wasn't a smoker. The singer believed it was caused by inhaling the toxic fumes from the Twin Towers after they fell on 9/11, since the dust filled the air around Ground Zero for several months afterwards, and Summer lived nearby. In fact, around 6,400 people have since died from 9/11 related illnesses, more than double the amount that died on the actual day of the attacks. The Dani tribe in Indonesia is known to cut off parts of their fingers after the death of a loved one. In 1928, Alfred Lowenstein, the third richest man in the world at the time, completely disappeared from his private jet in the middle of a flight. After Alfred took too long to use the bathroom, his secretary went in to check on him, but the bathroom was empty and the exit door connected to it was wide open. There have been many theories put forth, but Alfred most likely opened the wrong door by accident and plunged thousands of feet to his death. This surveillance image shows 14-year-old Noah Donahoe riding his bike fully unclothed on the day he went missing while apparently heading to meet some friends in Belfast. 6 days later, his body was discovered in a storm drain, with an autopsy confirming drowning as the cause of death, but his family is convinced he was murdered. Earlier this year, 41-year-old Ohio mother Tamara Banks was sentenced to 9 years in prison for the death of her daughter. Banks and her husband fed the girl almost nothing but Mountain Dew through a baby bottle, causing her teeth to rot and a severe case of diabetes, which eventually killed her. During a Taiwanese concert in 2015, a large amount of colored cornstarch powder was sprayed into a crowd of 1,000 people, creating a dense dust cloud of flammable powder in the air. The powder suddenly ignited near the stage, causing a massive fireball that quickly spread throughout the crowd. Despite the fire only lasting about 40 seconds, over 500 people were injured while 17 were killed. Diddy's former dancer Adria English has spilled some serious tea about the notorious rapper, and the details are beyond disturbing. English was a go-go dancer for Diddy and was stationed at certain checkpoints at his freak-off parties. She claims she was used by Diddy to help set people up for blackmail. Here are her most disturbing claims from a recent interview, which get worse as the list goes on. And to be very clear, these are all just allegations that haven't yet been confirmed. Diddy refused to let a young dancer use the bathroom during one of his parties, so she just went number 2 on stage. Guest Denzel Washington watched this happen and stormed out of the party in pure disgust. Diddy once had a threesome with rapper Nelly and an unnamed underage girl. In the leaked photos of Diddy eating fruit off of a woman, she was actually 14 years old. An underage girl Diddy sexually abused had 2 of his children, and he helped deliver the babies at his own residence. At one party, Diddy made J-Lo stick a bottle in the private area of an 11-year-old girl. Diddy's 2 sons, Justin and Christian Combs, ran a train on Justin Bieber while he was tied down and sobbing. A young girl who witnessed this happening is part of the lawsuit against Diddy. The rapper apparently slapped her when she tried to loosen the straps on Bieber. And lastly, English herself says she was on one of the Diddy tapes as an underage girl being sexually abused by a former president. English has hinted that she'll be one of the witnesses to testify against Diddy in his upcoming trial. The first known photograph of a person was taken in Paris in 1838. It only happened because a man and his shoe shiner were the only people still enough on a busy street to show up in the 10-minute exposure. Aerial photographer Robert Haas was taking photos over the Yucatan when he captured something spectacular. A bunch of flamingos were hanging out in the shape of a giant flamingo. Here's an extremely rare photo of a schema monk outside of Mount Athos in Greece. These monks have taken the highest level of monastic vows, characterized by a profound commitment to spiritual practices and typically a much greater seclusion from the outside world. This extremely rare polka-dotted zebra foal was photographed in Kenya last year. Here's a colorized photo of the last known Tasmanian tiger Benjamin at the Hobart Zoo in 1936. The species officially went extinct when Benjamin was accidentally locked outside of his sleeping quarters on a cold Tasmanian night and tragically froze to death. In 1989, Canadian hockey player Duncan McPherson completely vanished at an Austrian ski resort. 14 years later, in 2003, his mangled body and snowboard were found in the ice on the mountain. showing severe injuries consistent with machinery impact. Investigators concluded that he was accidentally run over by a snowcat and buried in a small gap, where his body remained hidden for more than a decade until the glacier started to melt. Mississippi man Jimmy Lee Gray was sentenced to death by gas chamber after kidnapping, sexually assaulting, and murdering a 3-year-old girl. When the gas was released, Lee began bashing his head against a metal pole behind the chair. The toxic fumes had failed to kill him quickly, leaving him gasping in agony for nearly 10 minutes. In 2021, zipline instructor Joaquin Romero tragically fell to his death after sacrificing himself for a customer. Realizing the zipline couldn't support both of their weights, he released himself to save the client.
Are you a cannibal?
No. You know what you have to do to be a cannibal? You have to have actually eaten someone.
Have you ever eaten any human flesh?
No.
The career of actor Armie Hammer quickly fell off in 2021 when several women accused him of being an abusive partner and aspiring cannibal. For example, his ex-girlfriend Courtney Vucekovich says their relationship was like dating Hannibal Lecter. She claims he genuinely tried convincing her to remove one of her ribs so that he could barbecue and eat it. In a collection of alleged messages, Armie claimed that he wanted to cut her skin and drink her blood, but that he would stitch her up again so as not to waste a perfect slave. He also wrote about wanting to pounce on her and grape her at knife point while she cried, and wanting to cut off one of her toes to keep a piece of her with him at all times. In response to these disturbing allegations, Armie was quoted saying, "I don't think that's any different than when someone looks at a baby and goes, 'Oh my God, look at those fat little legs. I just want to eat you up.'" 5 days before her wedding in September of 2009, Yale medical student Annie Lee suddenly went missing in the basement of a Yale laboratory. On the actual day she was supposed to get married, her body was found hanging upside down inside a wall cavity in the building. Her murderer, a lab technician who worked in the building, was eventually caught and sentenced to 44 years in prison. After his phone was stolen in 2020, 16-year-old Kevin Bui set a Denver house on fire that he mistakenly thought was the thief's home. The blaze tragically killed 5 members of an innocent family, including 2 young kids. Bui was tried as an adult and sentenced to 60 years in prison. After suffering a stroke in 2010, UK woman Sarah Colwell started speaking with a Chinese accent despite never even visiting China. No matter how hard she tries, Sarah can't return to her normal voice. She became one of less than 100 people to ever be diagnosed with foreign accent syndrome, a rare neurological condition caused by damage to the speech part of the brain. In 2011, 6-year-old Illinois boy Timothy Pitson was taken out of school by his mother to go on a trip. She then ended her life and left a note saying Timothy is safe at the hands of someone trustworthy and would never be found. The boy hasn't been seen since, as here's an updated age progression image of what he may look like now. The Vietnamese version of Cinderella is much darker than the family-friendly version we know and love. In the end, Cinderella boils her stepsister to death, turns what remains of her into a sauce, and sends it to her stepmother to eat. She enjoys the sauce so much that she eats it all until she finds the skull of her dead daughter and dies from shock. In 2015, a 46-year-old woman accidentally took 55 milligrams of pure LSD, equal to a staggering 550 times the typical dosage. She apparently blacked out for the first 12 hours and felt pleasantly high for the second 12. The next day, her lifelong foot pain had ceased, which helped her kick her morphine addiction. Earlier this week, New York State officials raided the home of social media star Peanut the squirrel and seized him from their owners before tragically euthanizing their beloved pet. Peanut was a rescue squirrel who was taken in more than 7 years ago by animal refuge owner Mark Longo. Having lost half its tail in a severe attack, Peanut wasn't adept enough to survive in the wild, so Longo decided to care for the squirrel in his home, eventually turning him into an adorable online sensation. According to reports, the state's DEC received multiple anonymous complaints about Peanut before showing up to Longo's home with at least 6 officers to confiscate the pet along with their rescue raccoon named Fred. The scumbag DEC claim that it's illegal to keep young wildlife as pets since they're not well suited for life in captivity and may carry viruses. Upon hearing about Peanut and Fred's deaths, Longo tearfully posted that he was in deep shock and grief since Peanut was the best thing that ever happened to us. JFK's older brother Joseph most likely would have been the presidential candidate instead, but was killed in a top-secret flying mission during World War II. John once said that he never would have gotten into politics if his brother Joe had survived. In 2014, a Jamaican phone scammer threatened to kill a retired American man named William Webster when he wouldn't fall for his scam. But the scammer didn't know that Webster was the former director of both the FBI and the CIA. When he flew to New York City in 2017, he was immediately arrested and sentenced to 6 years in prison. In 1740, Ivan VI became Emperor of Russia when he was only 2 months old following the death of his Empress mother. Just 1 year into his reign, the baby was overthrown by his cousin and sent to prison. He spent the next 20 years of his life in solitary confinement without any of the guards knowing his true identity, before eventually being killed in a failed rescue attempt, as was the plan if he ever tried to escape.